The True Objective Podcast with Objectivist Girls Lauren Rumpler and SidekickApp.com's Orion Martin. The True Objective Podcast, dispelling myths about our society.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the True Objective Podcast. We are so excited. Well, I'm so excited. Right now I'm doing this without a co-host, but we're having a lot of fun, Marsha and I. So today I have on Marsha Enright, and she is a board member at the Atlas Society, and she does a great many things, and she is definitely someone that I consider highly intelligent and very knowledgeable on many, many, many areas. And go ahead and say hi, Marsha, and tell us what you do.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for having me on. I'm extremely flattered by what you said. I run I do a number of different things, but one of my main projects is something called the Great Connection Seminar for 16 and up year old students. That's run in the summer by our institute, the Reason, Individualism, Freedom Institute.
Very cool. Very cool. And what do you do there?
We study very difficult texts from the classics, anything from poetry to physics, with the aim of teaching students how to think for themselves about any subject. The methodology that we use does that. And, of course, we also include work from writers on free societies, including Ayn Rand, Mises, Bastiat, the whole range, the things that are usually ignored in college. Adds his own spin to it by making sure that they learn the ideas of a free society. Well, now he's starting to work on a program in which we're going to be teaching businessmen about key ideas that they need to make their society improve and become more free.
That is really, really, really awesome. So you're helping create the Gulch of the world, but, not taking everybody away. Instead, you're building it right here, right, through the ideas of reason and logic and rationality and all those beautiful values that Ayn Rand taught us and hopefully instilled in the minds of the great thinkers,
Well, definitely. I mean, one of the aims and actually one of the outcomes that we consistently find at the Great Connections is students go away feeling so much more independent, self-confident, able to reason about anything, and basically a lot more autonomous. In other words, they develop a lot of the skills that you need to live as a free person.
That's really amazing. And, that's been a lot of the goals with Objectivist Girl is I created Objectivist Girl to try and teach people to be able to live for themselves through her values, through the understanding of her values. And, that's what Ayn Rand's philosophy really does for a person. It allows them to understand, if they understand it correctly, they are able to live a life where they achieve all of their goals and all of their dreams, and in this beautiful, productive way. And it's just, I love the philosophy. It's just so beautiful, very personal. So today we are talking about unconditional love, and I have a lot to say on this topic. I'm sure you do, but first, the research I did showed that really unconditional love, the idea of unconditional love, is really a very religious idea. So it was really propagated by the church and meant to draw people to church with the promise of never-ending love, which is always appealing to those of low self-esteem. But what it doesn't keep in mind is that this love has a condition. You have to follow the God in order to get the unconditional love, which means it's technically that unconditional love is on condition. So,
good point.
Right.
Are you talking about what's usually called agape?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Agape. I'm pretty sure that's the way I learned it. If so, we're both saying it wrong. So you know what? We're in this together, Marsha. So it's okay. So the question really becomes is if the people that really propagated this idea had a condition for that quote-unquote unconditional love, then can love really truly be unconditional? And that's the question we want to answer today. So what do you think, Marsha? What's your first instinct on this? Do you think that unconditional love is really unconditional?
Well, would you define what you mean by it for me?
So unconditional love is love without condition. And, of course, I'm using the word to define it, but it is the idea that if it doesn't matter what you do, it's a very altruistic idea. You don't need to give anything in return. You don't need to, you don't need to do anything certain. It doesn't matter what you do, this person will love you. A lot of parents say that they love their children unconditionally, that no matter what their children did, they would still love them. And for me, that sends off a lot of red flags. I'm just not buying it, but maybe you are. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think a couple of different things. On the one hand, since love is a response to something, it's not something you can just make yourself do, I don't think that you can just decide to have unconditional love towards somebody. It is true that parents tend to value their children and love their children even though they can do a lot of bad things. I mean, you rarely hear the mother or father of a serial killer like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer wholesale condemning them as evil. They sound very, very sad, which, I mean, of course, anybody who has a child like that, what else would you feel? Just anguish about it. But you don't hear them just outright condemn the child. So there's a certain psychology involved with being a parent that lends itself to this idea of unconditional love. In other words, it's partly because you've brought this being into the world, you feel responsible for the daughter or son's growth, their behavior, and you want to see them flourish. So you're trying to do as much as possible to help them learn how to live well. But that situation leaks over into a meaning of unconditional love that I have a problem with calling it love because, like I said, love is not something that you can just make yourself do, but is actually a useful idea for raising children and also for certain kinds of relationships with other people. A psychologist who talked about this the most was Carl Rogers. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I have a little bit of information on Carl Rogers. He was a humanistic psychologist.
Did you want to share your information?
Yeah, so it said in the research that I did that humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers spoke of an unconditional positive regard and dedication towards one single support. Rogers stated that the individual needed an environment that provided them with a genuineness, authenticity, openness, self-disclosure, acceptance, empathy, and approval.
And he was talking about, in the therapy situation, how the therapist is supposed to regard their clients. But you notice that he talks about it as regard, not love.
Right.
So he means the attitude that you take towards the other person in the environment of the therapy. And it's not too dissimilar to the attitude that's useful to use toward children when you're raising them, especially when they're young, because the human beings tend to be very sensitive to the criticisms of others, and especially somebody so significant as your parent. So it's easy for a parent, if they're very judgmental about what the child is doing right or wrong, and extremely punishing either verbally or physically to the child about that, to warp the child's sense of self. The child becomes very dependent on trying to please the parent instead of paying attention to what he actually needs to do in order to live well.
Exactly. His self-esteem becomes intertwined with his parents' interest and his parents' desires for him.
Mm-hmm. So in that respect, taking an attitude towards your child in which you're not spending a lot of time telling them that was good, this is bad, you're really bad for doing this, that's a very destructive way to handle your children, because they take it as you're talking about they as a person are bad or good, and it warps their ability to actually look at what they're doing and seeing whether what they're doing is successful or not successful in achieving good goals.
Right. Agreed. So, yeah, I think that was my first instinct when I looked at the concept of unconditional love was what is love? And that's the title of the entire series is What is Love? And I think that this discussion right here might help actually define that, because you have two people that are very into etymology on this show. I'm pretty sure Marsha is into etymology as much as I am. I just think that the meaning of words is absolutely essential to having any conversation. And so I want to kind of go back, since you're here, and this is so awesome to be able to discuss this on a show, is what is love? And love, as defined by Ayn Rand, and I really, truly think that she gives the best definition, is a selfish response to another person's values, to your values in another person, I believe. And so it's selfish, and that's important for us to discuss before we can discuss the idea of unconditional love. So if we just roll back a little bit, if love is selfless, let's go with, is love selfless? And I know that you also believe that love is selfish, as I do. And I think that you articulate this very well, and I was hoping that you might share some wisdom with us on why love is selfish.
Well, obviously human beings have a deep need for seeing the embodiment of their values in the world. That's why we constantly seek out friends. We want lovers. We have children. We hope our children reflect our values. It's, I think it's akin to why we love art, because it's hard, from the inside, you only know yourself as this state of mind, that state of mind, I feel this, I feel that, I think this, I think that. You don't know yourself as a personality. Mm-hmm. But if you find somebody else who deeply reflects many of your ideas and values, it's almost like experiencing yourself out there in the world.
Yes. Yes. Well, your current self. I agree with Taoist philosophy that kind of states that you're never really one way ever, that the human being kind of flows like water and changes all the time. So to define who you are is very difficult. Verbally, I think that we know who we are, but to try and verbalize it is very difficult, which is why love feels so good, because it's like getting to watch a movie of yourself. It's very satisfying to feel like you are understood when you can't verbalize who you are to other people. So, I mean, that was what I've been discovering over the past few months, is that through looking at Taoism and taking a really good look at that, I really like that concept, because it's helped me understand how valuable it is to share values with other people, because it's an understanding, an unspoken understanding of the same values. Because if you try and articulate your values, or any emotion really, and how passionate you are about the values is what I'm stating. Not the values themselves, but how passionate you are about it, you'll become very frustrated. But when you meet someone else that you can tell they're just as passionate as you are, it's like they already understand the things that you can't articulate, and it's awesome and beautiful. And so that's what I've come to over the past few months. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the experience of loving somebody else. It's that there's a lot of degree. Everybody's personality has a different degree of these different elements of interest, of ideas, of valuing this or valuing that. And also loving another person, if you see another person who embodies the things that you love about life and maybe has things in them that you wish you would develop more, then it's another way to be inspired by knowing that other person.
Oh, see, you're like me. I look for what you just said is dead on what I look for in a partner. I want someone that embodies a quality that I want to embody myself. So I spend more time with this person in order to develop that quality. So say, I had a great lack of patience for a good number of years. And so I met somebody that had a lot of patience, that also shared a lot of other values with me. And I spent a lot more time with them. We dated, and I came out a much more patient person because I was able to learn. And it was very good, and that's how I look at relationships, is I want to have relationships with people that help me grow. And I'm not sure everyone looks at relationships that way, but I really encourage people to, because even when the relationship is over, a lot of people feel empty when a relationship ends. I never feel empty because I know that I've walked away from the relationship a better person. And so I've bettered myself. And so if more people thought about relationships that way, I feel like they wouldn't get their self-esteem wrapped up in the relationship, but instead what they are learning from the relationship, and they come away feeling more full. Yes. And so this really leads us into the idea of selfishness in love. And so what Ayn Rand talks about is, she basically poses the question, would you ever feel fulfilled in having a relationship where the person came to you and said, I love you because I feel bad for you, because I think you need love? Or would you prefer the person come to you and say, I love you because of X, Y, and Z, because you embody the same values as me, because I think that you are incredible and you do all these amazing things? And so, I mean, right, Marsha, you'd prefer the latter, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, what person wouldn't be insulted by somebody who said, well, I'm loving you because you need me to?
But how do most people treat their relationships nowadays, Marsha? How do most people view love? As selfless. And the first is selfless. It is saying, you need this love, and I'm going to give it to you because you need it. And the second one says, I want you because you are valuable to me.
Right.
And it's very selfish. It's the idea that I want something from you, and you want something from me, and we're sharing this beautiful traders agreement. It's like a free market trade, and it's beautiful. And so love is selfish. Really good love is selfish.
Of course.
Exactly. And so that brings us back to the original argument. Can love be unconditional? And I think that the answer is no. Because love, if it is selfish, good love is selfish, therefore it can't be unconditional. Because if the person turns out to be either not what you originally assumed they were, or they end up turning into someone that you don't value any longer, which happens a lot of the time, then how can you say that that's love?
Well, did you have, in your research, did you find a definition of love that was not valuing?
No, a lot of the love stuff, a lot of the dictionary definitions centered around emotion, and I don't believe that love is an emotion. I believe that love is a choice that we make because it's a trader's choice. I think that if love is an emotion, then it's saying that we have no control. And I guess maybe it's a part of me that doesn't want to accept that I just have no control over who I spend my life with, or maybe it's that I've proven time and time again that I have good taste now that I've realized I have control through Ayn Rand. What do you think?
I have to really disagree with you about love not being an emotion. I mean, I think most people use that word to mean your emotional response to values that you see in another or in something in the world. I mean, you might love chocolate ice cream. You might love the look of trees when the sun sets. So I think it's an emotion. Now the question is, what you do about that is something else, and that's where your choice lies. In other words, you might find yourself responding to somebody else with a feeling of love, but you decide that this is not a good situation for you, and so you wouldn't act on it.
So for you, the question of unconditional love really wouldn't be whether it is possible, but whether it is productive.
Well, I wasn't talking about unconditional love. I mean, I think love is always a response to values,
right,
which is conditional. The person or the thing has to have certain characteristics, or else you're not going to respond to them that way. But but whether you decide to do something about that feeling is a separate decision.
Yeah, this is something that I also got from Taoism, that emotions and words and actions are all separate things, and we shouldn't treat them all as the same thing. And so when we decide to do something, it should be based on rationality, not emotions. And we need to keep those two separate. So emotion is something that you enjoy, not something you act on. Not necessarily that you act on, it's just input data. So when all of the data lines up, not just emotions, then you take action. But emotion is just one gauge of reality, and it's not even the best gauge. So, because often our emotions can be way off. As you'll see in any boyfriend-girlfriend fight where both parties are angry and clearly one of them is going to end up being right.
Or they could both be wrong.
Or they could both be wrong, which just is, even more to my point. But that's the thing, is that I agree with you. I think that you're right. It is an emotion, but it doesn't necessarily require action every time.
I mean, what if you fell in love with somebody, some fantastic person, but some circumstance of life made it impossible to ever see them? You wouldn't marry that person, would you? You wouldn't say you're in a relationship with that person. You might still love them as far as you knew about them, but you wouldn't necessarily act on it because it was an impossibility.
Yes, and you bring up a situation that's all too familiar to me. I left a 5-year relationship back in Indiana to come to New Hampshire to pursue my goals. And he pushed me and told me that I should go for my dreams. And, he's exactly the type of person that I would want to spend my life with. But we have different goals for our lives, so that's not possible. But I agree, I wouldn't marry him because we have different paths and we value our goals more than we value each other. I guess you could say we value ourselves more than we value each other, really, is what it comes down to. I love me a little bit more than I love him, so it's a close call, though. So anyway, the point is that I think that unconditional love could be applied to this a little bit, and I think it goes further than just this, but maybe you could love someone unconditionally, but maybe it wouldn't be to your best interest to do so.
Yeah, I mean, can we really say what everybody feels? If love is an emotion, can we really say no, somebody can never feel like that? I don't know. I don't think, I mean, it could be that somebody might love somebody else regardless of what they did.
But I'm not sure that that's necessarily love.
But it doesn't mean that it's good that that person feels like that.
Right.
Just that it might be possible. I just don't know for sure. I
Right.
have to think about that a little more.
Right. It could be
what's going on with that situation.
right. It could be very potentially harmful, and that's my first concern over unconditional love. But really, going back to Carl Rogers, he called it a regard or a dedication, not love.
Yeah, he wasn't talking about love. He was talking about an attitude that you take towards the other person in order to create an atmosphere that allows that person to grow.
Right. Now, what comes to mind when I read this is there are many animals that stick with their young through a certain period of time. There are many that don't, but others raise their young. And I would not say that an animal is really capable of emotions or love. What do you think?
Well, I have to really disagree with you about that because it's pretty clear to me that they do have emotions and they have responses in the sense of a response to values of all different kinds, especially the higher animals. But they don't have the kind of emotions we do. They don't have the complex and very ideologically connected emotions. They don't have this. We have a huge array of subtleties of emotions that animals don't seem to have.
Right. So I just wonder if it's the parent-child relationship is less of a sort of love, but more of like an instinct to support our young, which is very valuable. And I don't say it in a way that is condescending towards it. I think it's just as valuable. I think that a parent sticking with their child and seeing it through, even in the case of a horrible sociopath. I mean, even a sociopath needs somebody on their side. And, you know, as a mother, you have that instinct. But I'm not certain that it's unconditional love. But maybe that's just because I'm not a parent.
Yeah, I think the feeling is like love, that you value the child regardless of what they're doing and how bad they can be overall. I mean, you know, in particular situations, you can get really annoyed and angry with the child. But it's if you think of it as the child is basically an extension of the parent's life. So just as the parent loves themselves or should love themselves, they end up feeling that way towards their child because the child is their production of new life. Mm-hmm. I think that there's kind of a natural logic to it, that why parents feel like that. You know, if you think about living things, one of their main aim is to perpetuate their own life and the life of their kind. Mm-hmm. So that's a very deeply, deeply, deeply rooted motive. And so your children are some of your kind. They're like an extension of your own body, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting concept, and I wanted to ask you. It's been suggested to me, and it is a thought that I've had floating around in my mind for a while, that the idea of that desire to have children, is that actually just a fear of death? What do you think? Because it's been suggested to me, and I think that it actually, the idea holds a little bit of water.
Well, I mean, I can't answer for everyone because maybe for some people it would be. You know, I see other people who have children and spend no time with them, and so I have to ask myself, what was their motive? You know, was their motive social approval or what? You know, I don't know. So there's lots of different there's lots of different motives that people have for having children. Sometimes, of course, they have children with no motive. It's just an accident, right? An accident of a sexual encounter. But in my own experience, I wouldn't say I ever felt that about why I wanted to have children. It was always more that I love to see things alive and flourishing, and so it was a very exciting idea of having my own human beings. I was going to help learn to live and live well and flourish and see them be happy.
I love that answer.
Oh, thanks.
I do. I just think and coming from somebody that I know is so rational, it's great to hear that, because it kind of bothered me, the idea that people really only have children just to feel like they're avoiding death. Because it's not true. It's very irrational to think that, because you will pass on.
I have to ask myself, maybe that's what that person feels. That they're obsessed with death or worried about death for whatever reason. I mean, I don't think about death too much because what's the point?
Right. I'm
the
busy
point
thinking
is
about life.
Right, to think about life and what can I do while I'm here. So.
Right. I think that's a huge thing. I found that a lot of libertarians and a lot of rational thinkers don't think about death. A lot of people think about it, and it kind of seemed odd to me, because I used to think about it a lot, and then I guess I just kind of moved on and stopped thinking about it when I realized that it was kind of irrational to think about it, because there's no way I can avoid it, so I might as well focus on life. And that fear just kind of went away after a while. Mm-hmm. And when I hear other people talk about death in this really terrified manner, and I guess it really takes me by surprise. Uh-huh. And it's very funny and odd that I mean, it's not funny. Their fear is not funny, but it's funny that I see it so differently. And I feel like this is a very common thing. I mean, it's like what you just said, I focus on life instead of death. I've noticed that's a very common thing, and I kind of would like to do a show about that eventually, because it fascinates me how differently the liberty community seems to see death than what I view as the average person.
Yeah, I don't know about the average person, but I know that there's a lot of influence, from philosophy on the idea that life is meaningless. And so then if life is meaningless, death becomes, people become obsessed with the idea that, well, what's the point of anything? And that it's just a cycle of, oh, you're born, you live, and you die, and you're gone, and what did it matter? There is no, especially with with the idea that there is no God. Excuse me.
Right.
People had a hard time thinking that there was a higher or an absolute reason why you should be alive, and they just see themselves as in this endless cycle with no meaning, no purpose, instead of understanding that the very essence of being alive is to be alive and to achieve things and to change, for human beings especially, to make the world better, to make life better for yourself, for the people you love, and to perpetuate life as much as possible. Yeah. That's the essence of being alive.
Yeah, living is the meaning itself.
Right.
And so many people miss that. And it amazes me, though.
It's kind of a gestalt shift, though, from the way a lot of people think about things.
Right. And what's so weird about it is that the people that understand that living itself is the point, and that, a lot of the liberty community are atheists, and I find that atheists seem to be the least afraid of death, and the liberty community seems to be the least afraid of death, and they're the ones that don't believe that there's anything after and that life is the meaning itself, but yet the people that believe that there's life after this are so afraid of death. And you know what I think that is? I think that they're not so sure. Even the ones that say they're super sure that there's life after death, I think there's that little straw of doubt that just keeps them absolutely afraid. And I think it's because their decisions are guided by gaining access to the afterlife, to the good afterlife, not the bad one. And so they're worried that they're spending their lives doing something for something that doesn't exist. And atheists are just kind of doing what they want. And so I think that they're getting more fulfillment and enjoyment out of their lives, and so they're not nearly as afraid. That's my theory on that.
It could be. It could be. Yeah.
But yes, definitely something I would like to expand into a show. It's absolutely fascinating. But I want to bring this up because I found this in doing my research. Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow. Yeah. So he supported the unconditional love perspective by saying that in order to grow, an individual has to have a positive perspective of themselves. I have a major issue with this. And that is something that we talked about a little bit before, that unconditional love gives you the self-esteem, because they're talking about positive perspective that's self-esteem. And so it's stating that someone else's love and desire for you creates self-esteem. And whether unconditional love is possible or not, I think that it's very important to follow up the discussion of whether it's possible or not. I don't think we're going to get to an answer today, but I think that it was a very good discussion for a lot of people to think on. But what's really important is that I think that it's important that people don't think that love should ever be tied to self-esteem. And other people's view of you should never be tied to self-esteem. The only person that needs to love you is you. And so I wanted to touch on that. What is your opinion on this Abraham Maslow supportive? Yeah.
Well, I think he's talking about the same thing Rogers was talking about, but in regard to children. What I said earlier was that the human ego view of themselves is very sensitive to criticism from the significant others in your life. And at a young age, if you get a lot of criticism from those significant others, it can really warp your ability to learn the things that you need to learn to feel competent, efficacious, and worthy. Mm-hmm. So the parent has to be careful not to be overwhelmingly judgmental about the child, but instead be a guide to the child's behavior. In other words, separate the idea that what the child is doing makes them a bad person from the idea that that's not a good action. This is not going to be a successful way to live if you do X, Y, and Z.
Mm. Yeah, and I agree with you, but the issue comes when, well, actually, it's more of a question. Do you think that a child growing up feeling no love can turn out to be a human being with self-esteem?
I think it's very, very difficult. Because human beings are such social creatures that and the reason why I say this is, are you familiar with the studies of John Bowlby on what they call infant Erasmus?
I am not. Why don't you inform me on it? I'm sure my audience would love to hear about it.
Sure. Well, this guy was, I think he was a psychologist years ago. I don't remember exactly what time. You can look him up. His name is John Bowlby, Bowlby. Okay. And what he did was he studied children that were being raised in orphanages where they were cared for physically, but the workers simply had no time. There were so many children, the workers simply had no time to interact with the children. And he also compared this, and so the children had a very difficult time thriving. Even though they got plenty of food, they got, the physical things they needed, some of them would deteriorate physically and actually die because of this. Now, we're talking about very young children, infants to a few years old. And, excuse me, that work was followed up by a primatologist named Harlow, who took I think it was chimpanzees, and would raise them alone with no other chimpanzees around to see what would happen. And they became really odd, strange. They didn't know how to behave. They seemed very unhappy. And then he introduced a metal. I think the first one, I don't remember if there was no mother around at all, and then he introduced a figure like a mother chimpanzee, but it was all metal.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember if that was any better or not. But then what he did was introduce a cloth mother. So this was just a form of a mother chimpanzee, but cloth.
I remember this a little.
Right,
yeah,
right.
just vaguely. Yeah.
Those chimpanzees actually turned out much more normal than the ones with no mother or with a cloth mother.
Mm-hmm.
So it reflected the findings that Bowlby had with young children in the orphanages. In fact, I think that Bowlby's work was instrumental in moving the whole problem of orphans out of orphanages and into foster homes where they could actually get some interaction. So it just shows that the way human beings develop, they really require interaction with other human beings, and in a positive way. I mean, not just being slapped or whatever, but with some kind of affection and positive interaction.
Or we could give them stuffed animals.
I don't think they turn out as normal with that. No,
I'm joking. It's a joke on the cloth mother. Not a very good one.
Okay.
But yeah, that is an interesting finding. As somebody, my audience is aware of this. I've shared this several times. My parents and I are not very close, and my father was away all the time when I was a child, and my mother and I have a very different set of values, almost to the point where I'm not really sure how she's my mother. We don't get along on anything. But I was locked in my locker every day of high school. So I grew up.
Wait, somebody locked you in?
Yeah, they'd lock me in my lockers every single day. It was
so sorry to hear that.
And you know what? It's funny because I actually am glad of it. I feel that I have turned out to be a stronger, more independent human being with greater self-esteem because of those things. But maybe it's in spite of those things. I'm not certain. So this is I wanted to have this discussion not only because I think that my audience would benefit from it, but also because I never really felt that my parents' love was unconditional. I do think that my parents love me. I don't think that we like each other, but I think that they love me. But I'm not certain, had I turned out a certain way, that they would have loved me. But I listened to them enough to get by with love. So,
well, I mean, I'm betting that your parents took pretty good care of you when you were a baby.
They did, and that was the thing. They always took care of me. I was physically cared for. I always had everything I needed, plus everything I ever really wanted. My parents pretty much bought me whatever I wanted. I grew up with a very posh childhood, but I never really felt loved or connected to my parents. My mom would she'd shop for things and give me gifts instead of telling me that she loved me. And so that was a very difficult situation with her. So I always wondered if I grew up with self-esteem in spite of it, self-esteem is something I acquired. It was a very long struggle for me. I had a very difficult time getting to the point I was at now. And I feel like after I found Ayn Rand, I actually had more trouble with it than I did immediately. But over the long run, finding Ayn Rand is the only reason that I feel like I ended up with self-esteem. But the point is that it's hard for me to believe that there is unconditional love, mainly because I don't think that I have it, and I'm not certain I could feel it for anyone else. But
so let me ask you something. And to the extent your parents love you, is it because you do or say or something certain things?
Yes. So my parents would show me affection as a reward for doing things. And I mean, that wasn't explicit, but it was apparent to me as I got older. I never wanted to be a swimmer, but I let my mom pressure me constantly into every year rejoining the team and pursuing it, even though it wasn't something I wanted to do, something I enjoyed. But I was good at it, and she wanted me to do it simply because I was good at it. And I think that she had my best interest at heart, and it really wasn't something that she was trying to do, but she didn't understand me. And I guess that was really the other thing, was that I realized that she couldn't feel love for me because she never took the time to get to know me. And so that's the issue that I have with unconditional love. Because if you don't really know someone and you lose touch with that person, but you say, like often parents and children lose touch, but the parents say they still love their children, how can you love someone you don't know? And that's one of the major issues. Is maybe it's not just everybody that I think can't have unconditional love. It's certain situations where I think that people state that they have unconditional love, but they don't. And that makes me question whether all parents have unconditional love for their children or if it's just some that are just awesome at loving people.
Well, the thing is, if a parent loses touch with the child and the child changes a lot, they may not know what they're like currently, but they probably still know a lot about that person. So I could see why the parent might say they still love them. But what I was meaning for you is, you think your parents love you right now?
More so than ever, yes.
Based on what? Why do they love you?
They see that my father actually surprised me the other day. I found out that he had told his buddies that I was the hardest working individual he'd ever met in his life. And that he was really proud of me. And I'd never heard my father say that he was proud of me before, so that was very surprising. So maybe, and it falls back into that, when I do things right, I get affection, and when I don't, I don't. So it's on their terms. And that's why I say it's not unconditional, because it's always on their terms. Like growing up, I used to come to my mother about getting locked in my locker, and I would often be turned away. And she would tell me to, toughen up or whatever. And I always felt like I never really received the love that I really, really needed because I was getting bullied.
Yeah.
So I needed like extra love to make up for it.
Sure.
So,
she probably felt like totally helpless, like she didn't know what to do about it.
Yes. And I just want to remind my audience that I'm totally okay. Like all of this is I'm talking about it from a perspective of looking back. It doesn't bother me or change my self-esteem or my perspective of myself. I know that I'm a very valuable person and that I've done great things with my life, and that my parents' judgment of what I've done with my life has absolutely nothing to do with objective reality. So I just want to be clear on that I'm totally fine, and because my audience is like, wow, this is a lot of sob stuff. I don't normally talk a lot about my personal life, but yeah, I mean, it's very relevant here. So yeah, it's I can cozy up to the idea that people can feel unconditional love. And I guess that's from a perspective of somebody that loves very differently than the vast population of at least the United States. I'm polyamorous. I love many people at one time. And that is not something that a lot of people can understand how that feels. Just like I can't understand the feeling of wanting to be with one person for the rest of my life. It's very hard for me to wrap my head around that. And it's also very difficult for me to wrap my head around the idea of unconditional love. So maybe, and I came into the show like certain that unconditional love is not possible. But I think through the discussion I've discovered that it is possible, maybe even possible for me, but not possible for everyone. What do you think?
And what's making you think that it's possible and might be possible for you?
I think that it is possible, first of all, because I've experienced an unusual love myself. So, that opens up a realm of possibilities in the first place, that people can love differently. Also, the fact that you're a very knowledgeable person, and throughout this discussion, you've been able to bring up very good points as to why my arguments are not quite all there. Not wrong, just not quite all there. And I think that the turning point for me was probably when you talked about your children and your relationship with them, and especially the big turning point was the argument about chimpanzees. And I think that coming from a parent's perspective, which is, why I wanted to talk to you about this, because you understand this and I don't. It's interesting to me to look through your eyes and see how you feel about your children. And I can tell that there's not much in the world they could possibly do to lose your love. And right? I mean, that's a fair assessment.
Well, I mean, if they were serial killers, I would have a real problem. I would, but yeah, I don't know that I would love them then.
Interesting.
No, that's not what I was saying. But I was saying that I understand why parents are so tolerant of so much different kinds of behavior, or why they can be, because they feel like the child is an extension of themselves, and that they feel a great responsibility to get that child to live well and try to be happy. So when the child does things that are wrong, in order to fulfill that responsibility, you have to be able to withhold your judgment in a certain way and encourage the child to act better. So.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. And so, do you think that unconditional love is possible?
Well, if you mean love where you value the other person and no matter what they do, I don't know, because human beings have a big range of ways of responding to things. So there may be some people who would respond that way.
Right, and I think that was really right there, and we'd circled back to that point. That was kind of where I'd reached the point where I'd realized that I think that it is possible, but I'm not certain that it's always productive.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's a good state to be in.
Right. So the real question is,
you're not being concerned about whether I don't know what the person. See, whenever I see people doing things that seem to me to be not productive, not flourishing, I ask myself, what real need are they fulfilling by doing this?
Right.
What need are they fulfilling by doing this? So if I saw somebody who continued to care for somebody no matter what they did, no matter what awful thing they did, I would have to ask myself, what is that caring person getting out of the relationship psychologically?
Exactly. It's not a trader's relationship. That's what made me question it originally, was the idea that maybe, and I'm not certain that they feel this way, and that's where the real conundrum comes in, is that yes, people can be altruistic, which unconditional love is selfless. It doesn't matter what your values are, no matter how much you change, I will still love you. And that's easy when the person never changes. But when they do, in the instance that they do, if they continue to feel unconditional love or claim that they feel unconditional love, is it just a claim or is it actual love? And I guess that is the real question, is are you claiming that you feel it or do you feel it?
Mm-hmm.
And that is what has me in a complete mental bind. And I guess I'm going to have somebody on the show that really feels unconditional love, and it's been tested. And so that will be the next goal, is to have somebody on that really has felt that and to question them, because I would like to know.
And it has to, I mean, I think you have to get very, very clear on what you mean by unconditional love.
Uh-huh.
Does it mean that you value and you care for the other person and you are willing to take care of them, et cetera, regardless of what they do? Is that what you mean by it? How are you going to test? What are the criteria?
I would say that, I always put Ayn Rand's definition of love as the criteria. A selfish desire to see one's value in another.
Well, but right there, you can't then, I mean, if
exactly. Exactly, and so it contradicts it, and that's why it's so difficult. So I would have to accept a different definition of love for it to be possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could go with the more general idea of love as a response to something in the other person that you want to see in the world, and that the criteria to show that you love the person is that you're willing to care for them, or what? I don't know what criteria you want to use, regardless of what they do. Yeah.
It's very difficult for me to believe that it is possible, but I guess my active-mindedness can't quite close the case on it, because not that I want to believe that it is possible, it is that I don't have enough evidence, nor do I think that it's fair only to accept the definition that I go by. Mm-hmm. As much as I really believe, based on all of the research that I have done, that it is the correct definition. But that's just all the research I've done. So, and I'm still...
Well, 26. I mean, you can see, there's, on the one hand, you could say that Rand's definition has to do with what kind of love produces the most flourishing life.
Right. Right. And
so there may be a different kind of love that doesn't.
Right. It's whether any other definition really is love, because should love always feel good or not?
I think you have to do a little research on the meaning of love, the way the words use.
Exactly. I'll have to go into my etymology dictionary, which will be pretty fun. Mm-hmm. So we have reached the end of the hour. Thank you so much for coming on, Marsha. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Awesome. I think we got a lot of productive discussion in today, and I think our audience learned a lot. So do you want to tell them where they can find you?
Oh, sure. You can find me at the website. Well, you mean my email address and everything?
Oh, anything you want to share.
Sure. You can find me at menright at rifinst.org if you like to write. My website is, I have a website with all my writing called fountainheadinstitute.com. The website of my organization is RIF like Frank, I, N like Nancy, S like Sam, T like Thomas.org. And I'd be happy to take any questions or communicate with anybody in the audience.
Awesome. Well, that will be all for today. Make sure you go on and like the True Objective Facebook page for more updates. And remember, knowledge is not for all men, but for those who seek it. So truly, keep seeking.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn.